morning, Lionhearts. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said well. If you hear the pats in the background, that is Jaw running into this room. I fell down a rabbit hole last night watching one of my favorites of all time, the Three Stooges. And you know, I have always kind of just been one of those people that love the Shemp years, love the Curly years, and then for a long time just kind of dismissed the other years, the Joe Besser years and the Curly Joe DeRITA years. But to my surprise, when I was kind of reading up to find out what their career was like after Curly and Shemp, I was surprised to find out that the years of Curly Joe DeRITA were actually the most profitable, probably their most popular years. And even Larry Fine, who was a staple in the act the entire time of its career, even Larry would call the time with Curly Joe DeRITA the golden years. So today I want to go out and visit his grave over at Valhalla Pierce Brothers Cemetery in North Hollywood, and I want to tell you how he became a Stooge, what his impact was, and how kind of it all ended for the Stooges. Daze with Jordan the Lion, talking about Curly Joe DeRITA, begins now. I said it begins now. Look at that beautiful face. We have arrived. From what it appears online, he's not too far from Oliver Hardy. And I'm pretty sure I actually passed him over. So we'll go around. I always like to look at this fountain anyway. He's also not far from the Avenue of Heroes. And though not a veteran, he did perform many tours for the USO. It's a really cool monument for veterans here. It says, "Soldier rest, thy warfare o'er, dream of fighting fields no more, sleep the sleep that knows not breaking, morn of toil nor night of waking." Sir Walter Scott. You can see down here, this is Vietnam Memorial. We're gonna have to clean this off for him. I mean, after all, he was the last Stooge. Literally, the last actor to be named a Stooge, and he was also the last surviving Stooge. Curly Joe DeRITA. It wasn't even his birth name. He adopted the DeRITA from his mother. His parents were lifelong performers, and he joined his mother's act. What her act originally was she would get in like some sort of contraption that looked like a moon. Then they would hover her out over the audience and she would wave and sing and everything. And his father was like a stagehand. So when he was 8 years old, he started performing with his sister Phyllis and his mother in an act, and pretty much went on to do this the rest of his life, to be a comedian and a vaudeville performer, eventually touring with burlesque shows, doing comedy, and like I said, performing with multiple stints in the USO. Now, he was primarily a solo performer most of his career, but in the mid-30s, Columbia, who also already had the Three Stooges under contract making shorts, were picking up comedians to make shorts as well, and so Joe DeRITA made a handful of shorts for the same man, Jules White, who was making a lot of the Three Stooges things, and they would cross paths over the years. But the way it all kind of came down, how he ended up as a Stooge, was, if you know any of the history of the Stooges, or if you don't, I'll kind of fill you in. When they got their start, they were with a man named Ted Healy, who had quite a bit of charisma, and it was Ted Healy and his Stooges. And the original Stooges were Moe, Larry, and Shemp. Yes, Shemp was actually the first Stooge. He was in the act for quite a while, but Ted Healy was known for, as charismatic as he could be on stage, he was known to be a bit of a drinker and to kind of have a cruel heart. Once he got drunk, he would become violent or verbally abusive, and Shemp just got tired of it, and after a while decided to leave the group and wanted to go off and do his own thing and try and be in pictures, which is what he did. So when that happened, they needed a replacement, and Mo and Shemp both said, hey, what about our younger brother Jerome? And Jerome came, replaced Shemp, and he became Curly. So Curly was kind of the mainstay stooge, and eventually the whole crew, Larry, Mo, and Curly, would get tired of Ted Healy, and they would decide to leave Ted Healy's act and go off and get a contract on their own, which is what they did with Columbia. Ted put together another group of stooges and went off, and it wasn't really that successful. Then Ted would sadly be beaten while a night out at the Trocadero, and the next day would die of his internal injuries. Three Stooges were actually very heartbroken when that happened, but their life went on, and they had a successful career making shorts with Columbia Pictures. Now, they did it with Curly from 1934 until 1946, when he had become unable to perform any longer. He'd had a stroke, and it just wasn't going to be able to be done. So Shemp decided to come back, and Shemp came back, performed for the next 9 years with the Stooges, until leaving a boxing match. He was in his car with some friends and suffered a heart attack. His friends literally said, we were talking to him in the car, and then all of a sudden looked over and his head was slouched down with his cigar burning a hole in his shirt, and Shemp died in 1955. So the Stooges had a contract to finish out with Columbia, their shorts. They had another 2 years on their contract, and so they had found a man named Joe Besser, and Joe Besser was the next replacement for Shemp. Now the problem with Joe was that originally he has a bad rap. They always say, like, well, Joe didn't want to take any abuse, so the comedy kind of tamed down, but that wasn't necessarily true. Joe Besser just didn't want to be hit in the face all the time. Actually, that was his one stipulation, is I don't want to be slapped in the face. So Larry would, he already basically had a one big callus on the side of his face for all the years of hitting from Mo, that he just said, I'll take all the hits, it's no big deal. But Joe Besser would take, he would be part of the slapstick comedy. He would take some of the abuse, and eventually he would take slaps to the face and everything. But what happened was, when they fulfilled their contract, the Stooges were basically let go because Columbia decided to disband their shorts department. And so the Stooges were still going to go and do live appearances, which they did in the off times when they weren't filming, to make a lot of money. And Joe Besser he couldn't do it. He decided to quit because his wife was really ill and he didn't want to leave her side to go touring. Now what happened was, they decided to find a new stooge, and that's how Joe DeRITA became a stooge. Now, at the same time that they released the Stooges and wrapped up their shorts department, they ended up starting a company called Screen Gems that would end up distributing the old shorts on television now. And so Curly Joe joined the act. They met up on a sound stage to rehearse the act, and he said learning the act was really easy because, they'd been doing the same act for 20 years. Everybody knew the act. If you were a comedian, you knew the act. And so he said he just rehearsed with them a little bit, and then they went off to go do this tour. Now he said, originally, you can see here he has hair. He had hair more like Shemp when he joined the group, but when they started going out and doing the personal appearances, because of the resurgence of their shows being on television now, all the kids knew who the Stooges were, and they started showing up at all these appearances. So they showed up to like 5,000 or 6,000 kids, and with that hair, it was confusing to the kids. So the first couple of shows, they were calling him Joe, and then they cut his hair to look a little bit more like Curly's. But then they realized that the kids were confused by who Joe was, because the episodes with Joe hadn't really been circulated yet. So they decided to make it a little easier on the kids watching, and they just added Curly to his name, and he became Curly Joe. So that's how the name came about. And Joe DeRITA said when he joined, he had an agreement with the Stooges that he was not going to copy anyone that had been there before. He was just going to do what he felt came naturally. He was going to use his own comedy, and if he felt like there should be a kind of a Curly thing in there, he was going to do it, or a Shemp thing in there, he was going to do it. And that's how they successfully transitioned into the Curly Joe years. Now, because they didn't have a contract at the time, they were owed money by Columbia, and they went over to 20th Century and made some Stooges feature films. And I remember seeing, growing up, Three Stooges Meet Hercules. That was a great one. But once they became popular with all the distribution of their old shorts and were over making a picture with 20th Century, Columbia decided they were going to settle with the Stooges, and they wanted them back. And so the Stooges ended up coming back and making 6 feature-length pictures at Columbia. And when Curly joined, Curly Joe, he joined in 1958, and he was there up until 1970, when Larry Fine ended up unfortunately becoming unable to perform. I believe he had a stroke as well, and ended up going to the motion picture hospital. Now what's interesting is that Curly Joe said that during the time of those old shorts being rebroadcast, he said they had an amazing amount of kids come out, and the crowds were just gigantic and everything. But he said then all of a sudden the Parent Teachers Association in different towns were publishing articles talking about how the hitting and everything on the show was a bad example for kids. And nowadays, you know that if anybody complained about that, the show would probably be taken off the air. But he said back then, he said, we didn't really change the act that much. He said maybe a couple of things, instead of poking in the eyes or something, we would do something with a prop like a paintbrush or something. But he said we didn't really change it that much, because he said we saw that, you know, for as many people that were writing these articles and were complaining, we were still selling out everywhere we were going, and it didn't affect, you know, if we said, oh, forget it, if they don't want to come, then they don't have to come, they don't have to let their kids watch the Stooges. That was just our attitude about it. And he said we didn't pay for it financially or with our prestige. So Joe DeRITA said in his entire time as being a Stooge, the 12 years with the boys, he said not ever once did we have any disagreements. He said maybe one argument, but he said I can't even remember what it would be about. He said not one, nothing serious. He said we never disagreed on comedy or money or anything. He said Mo was always the one that ran the group. He kind of decided business-wise what we were going to do. Larry was very lackadaisical. He was just happy to be there and having fun, and just wanted to do whatever we were going to do. And he said they gave me the freedom to be who I wanted on screen, and I think it really came off as being fun-loving that way. Now when Larry became unable to perform, they still had some projects in the works. They had a cartoon that was already out, and they were about to do a pilot for a new TV show. And they had a couple of like nightclub gigs booked, but they put them on hold. And then Mo ended up becoming physically unable to perform any longer, and gave his blessing to Curly Joe to put together a new group of Stooges, which they went out and did a couple of nightclub acts, and it was just not, it just wasn't popular. Which is, you know, that's kind of where Joe DeRITA's original profession was doing the nightclub circuit, and that's how he ended up getting into the Stooges. Was that when they were looking for someone to replace Joe Besser, Larry Fine had been in Vegas and seen him perform at the Sands and said, this is our guy. So the only thing that broke up the Stooges in the end was that they just became too old to perform. When Joe DeRITA joined the group, the reason that they toned down a little bit of the physicality had nothing to do with the pressure from the Parent Teacher Association. They said it was because, or at least Curly Joe said, well, when I joined, you know, Larry was in his late 50s and Mo was in his early 60s already. So that's why a little bit of the physicality was toned back. But, like I said, Larry Fine said that they made more money in the years with Curly Joe DeRITA. They had more success, more fame. They made, I believe, 10 movies total all together, the three of them together. And he was the last surviving Stooge and the last to be named a Stooge. And if you take the alternative exit, there's an amazing shrine to flight here. Portal of the Folded Wings. That's Columbia. Yeah, pretty cool. This is where the official memorial place is of Amelia Earhart. I've vlogged it before. So as soon as you exit, look at what the driveway is for. Look at this sign. The Motion Picture Costume Company. Well, Lionhearts, we are going to call it a night. I want to thank Denise Chavez and Christine Morrison for becoming my newest Patreons. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this vlog. See you all next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.